Well, hello again. I'm just trying to get the call to work here. So I want to welcome everybody to Whistleblower Heroes, everyday heroes and educators sharing the information that you need to know here on Revolution Radio. And I'm your host, Ella, with my co-host, acclaimed author Donald Jeffries. And you can join us live every Tuesday starting at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time and every Friday starting at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time by visiting freedomslips.com and clicking on Studio A. There's also a call-in phone number there on the homepage. So, Donald, it's nice to speak with you.
Yeah, it's always nice to talk to you, Ella.
So, how have you been? So, I know you have your show going, and how have you been in general?
Okay, right. We're getting excited for I finished up all the work on the next book, which is going to be released in May, but they're already they're putting together the advanced reading copies, so they'll be going out to prominent people, and I'm hoping that people like Ron Paul and everything will be acceptive to it, and because I think they'll like it, and try to get some blurbs and maybe an introduction from him, and so it's nice and exciting time. I should be getting the reading copy pretty soon, so I'll see how it looks. I like the cover and everything. I thought they came up with a great cover, and so we'll see how that goes, and hopefully they can get some kind of, because the last couple of books, they've got a lot of good advanced praise for my previous books. So hopefully they'll be able to do that, and I'll start promoting that constantly. And then my book on bullying, I think it's still being released in the fall, but they've already come up with the cover, and it's a really nice cover. So, and it was based on my suggestion. I think I told you that has the photos of the Richard Johnson had a project where he just photographed a bunch of people, kids and adults, with various names and slurs written on them that people get called by bullies, and I think it looks pretty good. I like the way it looks, so I think they're going to keep that. So I'm really happy to have both books out. So I'll be going back and forth promoting both of them and my radio show. So I have a lot to promote, and I just sometimes I get tired of tooting my own horn, but I don't know what else you're supposed to do. You have to promote yourself these days.
That's right. I know that's an uncomfortable thing. I feel the same way. I just feel like, oh, it's all about me, but in a way, we have to sell the show. So I'm supposed to have Mark Pendergrast. He's another acclaimed author, and I'm going to try and add him to the call. So hold on just a minute, and Donald, you can feel free to keep on talking if you like,
okay.
Or wait for me. So I'm going to try and get him on, guys, because he's a very intriguing man, and he's written so many great books. So I'm going to try and pull him on, guys. So give me just a second. You can still hear me though, Donald, right?
Oh yeah, I can hear you.
Oh, good. We can keep talking while I dial.
Okay, cool.
Did your Skype update as well? Because that's how we run the station. It goes through Skype.
Well, I'm on I've been on the update for a while, and I don't like it, but I let it update, which people have told me I shouldn't have. But I guess I'm kind of getting used to it.
It stopped working. I had to update because it just wasn't going to let me do it. So I didn't have a choice.
Well, we talked about, once Microsoft got its hands on it, it's it was gonna bear the Bill Gates imprint, and that's just power it off and reboot. Nobody knows what's wrong with it, but just that'll fix it. That's pretty much the standard for Windows. So hopefully Skype doesn't become like that.
Me too. Okay, guys, I'm gonna try and pull them in. Well, I'm not hearing it ring. Yeah, I am just not used to the new Skype where I think I'm doing it right. I added a call and
you add him to the call.
I did. And
then you should see like his picture, and it should be spinning up there if it's.
Oh, I'm calling his line.
Oh, I don't. That's beyond me because you have the paid subscription.
Hi, please leave a message for Mark or Betty at the beep.
Well, I guess it went through. He's just not available. So anyways, well, maybe in the future, it's only happened one other time that my guest hasn't made it. So could be a time confusion because sometimes I'm speaking to people in different time zones. Anyways, let's talk. Let's share some news. There's some really interesting news going on, but I think maybe let's start with the most obvious, but I don't know how much there is to say about it. The government shutdown.
Yeah, boy, it's I don't know it's just amazing. This Trump guy. In fact, I was before the day I was working on a new blog where I'm just something about Trump being our Trump the psyop or something. Because he's just looking more and more like an actor. to me. I mean, this thing, but with the government shutdown, it's unfortunate again that it's all, if you remember the government shutdown under Obama, Bush, Clinton, it goes up all the way back to Clinton. This is because our leaders are so incompetent. They don't know how to run things. So typically at the last minute, they have to try to struggle, and they're all fighting over their own pork barrel projects and, what to shut down and what not to shut down. So we go through this every time. It's just that depending on who's in office, when Obama was in office, then typically the blame would be placed on Congress. They were, they're not Obama. He was, he didn't want it to go to. Now it's all, of course, on Trump. I mean, Trump is the ultimate, the ultimate WWE bad guy. And with all this going on, and I don't know if people saw it or not, but it's amazing to me that, and again, I don't like either the Democrats or the Republicans. I call them Republicrats. But the Democrats like Bob Menendez and I think Nancy Pelosi, apparently they've gone for a trip, is it Hawaii or something? They've gone to a trip somewhere, taxpayer financed, of course, where Menendez was photographed on the beach, looking studly, without a shirt, trying to hit on a young girl. But these are our leaders, and it's just amazing. These are the same people that are going crazy about the government workers being furloughed and all that, and yet they're on taxpayer dime. They're taking a vacation, and as far as I can determine, all of them, including Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who rightfully made some remarks that I agree with about, Congress shouldn't be accepting their salaries during this. Well, apparently she's accepting hers. So it's all hypocritical. And this guy, like I said, Trump is just, he's just a walking caricature. And now what I was really put me over the edge is this stupid thing where he had the fast food buffet in the White House for the Clemson football team. You must have seen pictures of that. Hello? Hello?
Sorry about that. I was on mute.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I said, but you must have seen pictures of the fast food buffet that Trump just put on in the White House for the Clemson Tigers.
Yes.
And I just cannot believe, it's like, this is why I think he's an actor, because I can't believe anybody, we know he has handlers all around him. Let's say, Mr. President, but he's relishing in this, which I don't believe what they say. I do not believe that a 72-year-old man who is overweight, but appears to be in great shape. He's got energy. He's walking around. How he could have a diet like this, a poisonous diet of fast food, and washing it down with 12 Diet Cokes a day. I don't think anybody could survive to his age drinking 12 Diet Cokes a day. That's so I think it's all theater. And I can't believe if he's actually doing that, then he's one in a billion or whatever that could survive that. But the idea that he would serve a bunch of fast food in the White House. He's got personal chefs and all that there. And of course, what happens when he does it? I mean, it's almost like has walking around with a target on his back. Then naturally, everybody from every quarter is. I mean, I must have seen so many pictures all over social media of him standing there with a stupid smile on his face in front of all the fast food. It's like it was just set up for attention. So it's just so hard to. Because I'm in the middle of this, and I hate his enemies so much that I end up defending him a lot. But he's just such a buffoon, and we're just kind of stuck in the middle because now he's there, he's in the center of everything, and even the government shutdown becomes about him. Becomes where it was not that way before. Before it was okay. There's this partisanship. They're not getting along. Now it's just about Trump, and I don't know. It's very. It's very difficult because I had an interview last week where I deal a lot with the people who are pro-Trump supporters, and they stand by this guy. They swear by this QAnon, this phenomenon. Who we don't. A lot of them used to think it was
debunked.
Well, you would think, but their whole. Well, again, I think it's at this point they've put so much into it that they have to. It's almost like. Any leader or people that keep making predictions, something's going to happen here, something's going to happen here. Then when it doesn't happen, then they lose.
No
some
one talks
followers.
About it, right?
Yeah, or they just say, well, this is why, and then they make a new prediction. And so that's why I used to hate that about Alex Jones back when he was good, where he would make predictions, and it goes back to some of the JFK assassination researchers used to make predictions, and I never make predictions because I don't know. I'm definitely not an insider, so I don't know what they're planning. But So I think when you do that, but when you keep talking about arrests and all this stuff is going down and nothing's happening, I mean, I don't see any evidence of that. I mean, I would like to believe that there was a cabal of. It certainly would love to believe JFK Jr. faked his own death and is leading the good guys. But but what happens is when you say those things, then you lose, and it's a huge mass of people out there that are in, that support the QAnon phenomenon. And so
a couple of my dear friends do, and I respect them immensely, and I'm trying to wrap my brain around it.
Yeah, I do too.
I'm such an evidence-based person. It's just so hard.
A couple of the people that have helped me the most on the internet with the podcast, I mean, they just have, one of them has 500,000 subscribers, and almost all of them are diehard QAnon believers. So, you have to, I don't want to, because I don't know that it's, like I said, it's not impossible to believe that. I just look at what Trump does, and it just for instance, I tried to point out, most people don't realize when he appointed William Barr as his new attorney general, not only was he a former attorney general under the first Bush the elder, but no less than Lindsey Graham publicly goes and is telling people, the Barrs and the Muellers, the guy who he's supposed to be overseeing and who is supposedly persecuting Trump, are best friends. And have been best friends for years. So how are we supposed to believe that Trump is feeling, and he probably should feel, persecuted under this crazy Russiagate investigation? But why would you possibly, not talking about an ultimate insider and a neocon fixture like William Barr, but who is best friends with the guy who's persecuting? I've never seen anything like it. It's unprecedented, and to me it smacks of so obvious how phony it all is, but you still get people that say, oh, no, he's keeping his enemies close. Well, all he's got around him is our enemies, if you believe the theater. Mm-hmm. It makes no sense to me. So trying to even analyze it at this point is impossible, because Trump is the phenomenon of Trump, especially if nothing gets done, and it doesn't look like too much is ever going to get accomplished, any kind of reforms. If nothing gets done,
there's a lot of money being spent on this probe, on this Russian probe.
Yeah, exactly, and it's
the government a ton.
And so many. I mean, I just sit there. So many people who loved my books and who loved me, but I sit them. They're basically calling for a military overthrow of the president. And there, I see them talking about how can our president not trust the intelligence agencies? Like, what are you talking about? You trust them? Since when do you trust them? And Mueller was one of the main cover-up artists in the 9/11 investigation. Mm-hmm. So, and I don't, whatever Trump is, that's the only thing that keeps me even defending him, and not even really defending him. I just would never side with those people. I mean, our intelligence agencies, people like Mueller, and the New York Times, the Washington Post, and these mainstream media outlets that have lied to us about everything.
Right.
So so it's, I don't know. It's very difficult. But unfortunately, I don't see anything beyond Trump, because Trump is going to be the last Republican president. There's no question about it. Whether he gets reelected, which he could, it's possible, but he's going to be the last one, because I don't see any other type of politician like Trump on the horizon. And all that's out there besides that are a bunch of neocon Republicans that probably wouldn't get 30% of the vote in today's America. Mm-hmm. But Trump got a lot of those white working class disaffected voters that I don't think would bother to vote for a Jeb Bush or whatever, Mike Pence or whatever these typical mainstream Republicans are out there. So I don't know, it's getting harder and harder to follow politics, but that's what I write about. So it's kind of
it's surreal and conspiratorial. It's like it's up my alley in a way, and it's quite fascinating. But it's when I think of what's happening right now, and I know people that work in the government are like on small levels, and the TSA, what's going on, and just these, in the parks, the national parks, there's trash overflowing. It's,
right.
So it's really, really sad. And being from California and Southern California, where there's so many fires, it concerns me that they're neglecting all the brush and dried brush that exists there.
Yeah.
It is a desert. But I wanted to get back to something. I was just kind of looking for some interesting stories while you were speaking. And the Huffington Post has some interesting sections, including like weird news, technology news. Is that my guest? That's him. Hold on. I'm going to mute myself, and we'll bring him in. Hold on just a second. Yay, we have our guest. Okay. He said his phone malfunctioned. That kind of stuff happens to me all the time. Some of it's natural, some of it I wonder, but Okay, let's try this again. He's quite a fascinating man, and I'm glad to have him aboard. So is Donald, of course. But
of course.
Okay, here we go. This new Skype. I hope that's not why it was malfunctioning. So we'll find out. We'll see if we can get him on here, guys. Here we go. Let's try that again. Add to call. This is like the train wreck interview, but it's going to be worth it. You got Donald, and you got this great guest coming. Hold on. Let's try that again. Add to call. Here we go. Let's try that again. It added him, but it's not.
Hello.
Hi there. Thank you.
Hi.
Thank you so much for being here. So, guys, I'd love to introduce you to our guest, Mark Pendergrast, and he is an independent scholar, science writer, author of many books of critically acclaimed nonfiction. And you can check out all his books, and they're extensive, guys, by entering his name at Amazon.com. And so, yes, you do have extremely broad interests, I have to say. And if there's anything else you want to add to that, please feel free. And if not, I'd like to know about you, like how you became a writer, when did your interests develop, and maybe where you're from or where you went to school. Feel free.
Well, that's a lot. I grew up in Atlanta. I now live in Vermont. I am one of 7 children, and my parents were very literate and curious and interested people who gave me a very large vocabulary just by listening to them when I was a kid. And I've always liked to write. So I started, writing for my high school literary publication, and then went on to major in English literature, and then went on to write freelance articles for a long time. I didn't write books until I was in my 40s.
I see.
So,
Yeah, I when I was doing the math, I figured you might have been around 40, and I noticed it was a later interest, or at least as far as the books go.
Right.
And what was
So
your
my
first? Oh, go ahead.
My first book was For God, Country, and Coca-Cola, A History of Coca-Cola, which I got interested in because I grew up in Atlanta, but it's really quite a fascinating book. It's in its 3rd edition now, and it's basically about how a patent medicine turned into the world's most popular and most well-known soft drink. The patent medicine had coca leaf, so it had a little cocaine in it, and caffeine.
I've heard that, yeah. Interesting. And when did they decide to change that recipe?
They took the cocaine out in 1903, or most of it anyway. They didn't quite get all of it. But let me just get a drink here. Okay. Here we go. But it's an amazing story where the U.S. government sued Coca-Cola in 1911 and almost put them out of business. At that point, it didn't have cocaine in it, and they were suing them for the fact that it was mislabeled because it didn't really have full coca leaf in it. But they also were upset that it had caffeine in it and that they were serving it to children. So ever since that time, they've kept Coca-Cola has never shown children under the age of 12 drinking Coca-Cola anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And, there's so much to the book. It was inside Nazi Germany at the same time that the United States was putting Coca-Cola men in Army uniforms and sending them behind the lines. It was really quite amazing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know that book did fairly well, so I guess there's a lot of interest.
Yeah, it got published all over the world.
And then what's your most current release, your most current publication? Or
the
book,
most current, the most current two are called Memory Warp and The Most Hated Man in America, and also City on the Verge, which is about Atlanta, where I grew up, came out shortly before that. So those all came out last year.
And who is the most hated man in America?
2017.
2017, yeah.
Right.
Who is the most hated man?
A lot of people think that it's Donald Trump, but that's not true. At this point, it might be other people like, what's his name? Who's the Harvey Weinstein?
Yeah.
I think he might have bumped Jerry Sandusky, but that book was about Jerry Sandusky, and the subtitle is Jerry Sandusky and the Rush to Judgment. As you recall, he was the assistant Penn State football coach for many years, and he had retired, and then he was accused by, tons of kids, I think it's now up to 35 or something, of having sexually abused them, and he was convicted, and he's in prison, but I'm quite convinced that he is innocent. He actually was a nice guy, is a nice guy, who was stupid around children. He wanted to help them. He started a charity called The Second Mile, in which he tried to help troubled kids. Many of them were from either single-family homes or had drug problems or were in foster care or whatever. And it's a complicated story, so I'd urge people to actually, pick up the book and read it. But one kid named Aaron Fisher, at the prompting of his mother, said that Sandusky had hugged him after they wrestled together. This is true. And he would crack his back, but they had their clothes on. And they sent him to a therapist, and the therapist basically believed in repressed memory therapy, which is what my other book is about. It's called Memory Warp. Mm-hmm. And repressed memory therapy has been completely debunked, and it's discredited by any decent scientist, but it's now coming back into vogue. I think Cosmopolitan just had an article saying all this same old stuff. It was sort of a fad of the late 1980s and early 1990s. And the idea was that if you had problems in your life, that they could be explained, these symptoms of depression or anxiety or eating disorders, that many people who were sexually abused do have those symptoms. On the other hand, many people have those symptoms who weren't. So many of us do. Mm-hmm. So what happened was they would sort of go backwards. They would tell people, well, you must have been sexually abused, and I can help you remember it by either hypnotizing you, or you can think hard about it, and maybe you'll dream about it, or maybe you'll have a panic attack, and that's really a flashback, etc. And people would come to visualize horrendous things that happened to them that, in fact, did not. And that's what happened to many of the people who claimed that Sandusky had harmed them. The case that most people know about is the case of Mike McQuarrie, who was a graduate student who was serving as a coach at Penn State. He came into the shower, to the locker room, and he heard the shower running, and he heard slapping sounds that he interpreted as being sexual. He only heard them for like a couple of seconds. And then he saw Sandusky walk out of the shower with a kid. and he decided that he must have been sexually abusing him. Well, Sandusky did take showers with kids. He was unbelievably dumb, as I said. But in fact, the kid and he were slapboxing, and we know this because the kid said this.
Mm-hmm.
That was before he got lawyered up. The other thing is that once this thing went public, it became a snowball that had more to do with money than with repressed memories, because it was like they were giving away millions of dollars to anybody without any kind of vetting for these cases. It was really ghastly.
I see. Well, Donald, it sounded like you wanted to ask him a question. I sense that.
No, that was the looking at a list of your books. That's the title that jumped out at me. I mean, I studied the Sandusky case a little bit. I'm astonished because I had heard that McQuarrie, I guess it was McQuarrie, had witnessed him actually having sex with the child in the shower. Was that just misreported? Because that's the way I remember reading, is he actually saw it.
That's what everybody knows, and that's what everybody has read. And that's because what happened in this story was that 10 years later, the police heard about this incident. What happened was McQuarrie went to his father and his father's boss that night that he had seen Sandusky walk out of the shower, and that he had overheard these slapping sounds. And he kept, the boss, whose name was Jonathan Drainoff, kept saying to him, "But Mike, what did you see? What did you see?" And he kept talking about these slapping sounds. And they both concluded that he probably had heard Sandusky, basically horsing around with a kid in the shower, which is what he was doing, which he was famous for doing.
Mm-hmm.
And they did not turn it into anybody. They advised McQuarrie to go and talk to Joe Paterno about it. And he did eventually go and talk to Paterno about it, and said he'd been disturbed, that he thought that Sandusky was doing something sexual in the shower with this kid, but he didn't say he saw anything. So then Paterno reported it up the line to the head of the athletic department, who reported it to the president of the college, etc. And they were all tried and found guilty of hiding this. They weren't, in fact, hiding anything. They decided to tell Sandusky not to bring second-line kids to the Penn State showers anymore.
Right.
Because it looked bad.
Right.
It was only 10 years later, when the police came and said, "Mike, what did you see?" that he changed his memory. And people do that. It doesn't need therapy to do that, especially the further something is in your past, the more likely you are to basically come up with something you're quite sure happened and it didn't. Anybody who has siblings knows this, because we have different versions of our childhoods than other people do about the very specific things. So McQuarrie got himself into deep trouble, because by saying that he had witnessed sodomy in the shower, which he, I think convinced himself that he had, people got very angry at him and said, "Well, why didn't you run in and stop it?" So he said, "Oh, well, I did stop it. I slammed the locker so that they would stop." But he didn't actually do any of that. Anyway, so that was what makes everybody sure that he was guilty, is the McQuarrie thing. And you have to go through each separate episode to see exactly what went on in this. But I mentioned Aaron Fisher, who was the, quote, victim number one. And it took them 3 years, basically, he was the only alleged victim for a long time. His therapist, whose name is Mike Gillum, says he does not do repressed memory therapy, but in fact it's very clear that he does. He sort of instructed him on how your mind works and on how you dissociate and forget things. And, Gillum, for instance, in his book about this, he wrote, "With Sandusky's help, Aaron managed to disassociate himself from the grim reality of abuse, as victims do." And Fisher said, once I started therapy with Mike and began to tell him everything, the nightmares actually got a lot worse. They were nightmares about what happened to me all those times Jerry was doing the things and making me do things to him. But that was only after he had been influenced for years to say this. First, he said there was no oral sex, then he said there was, then he said there wasn't, then he said there was. But basically, because of the number of people that they had coming forward by the trial, looking at each one individually didn't make much difference. I was only able to speak to one of the alleged victims, and his name was Justin Struble. And during the trial, he said the reason he changed, and let me also make clear, all of them amplified, most of them originally said, no, Sandusky didn't do anything to me. And then, over time, was influenced by therapy, influenced by very bad police interviewing techniques, they would come up with more and more and more amplified stories. Well, that could be because it's really true and it happened to them and they were too ashamed to talk about it. But it's unlikely that it would keep ramping up that much over time. Mm-hmm. It's not the way the memory works. You basically, you do forget things sometimes and then you do remember them, but it doesn't all come back to you in little tiny bits and pieces, which is the way that the repressed memory therapists tell you. So I was able to interview Struble, and he told me, yes, it was all repressed memory therapy, that if I had asked him before he talked to the police or the therapist what he thought of Sandusky, he would have said he was a great role model, he had helped him a lot, et cetera. And that's what was true with most of them until it all broke open. The other thing is that they have a tape recording of the police sort of colluding with a lawyer and saying how they would influence kids. He would say, listen, this is what we found so far. You fit the pattern of all the other ones. This is the way he operates. And the other kids we've dealt with have told us that this has happened to them. Did that happen to you? Well, that's terrible police interviewing. You're supposed to ask open-ended questions. You're not supposed to basically tell people that if they don't tell you something, you're going to disappoint them, mm-hmm. and that they know something happened to you and that you've got to tell them that. Anyway, I'm probably not being terribly coherent about this. I would urge people to read the entire book because it's just amazing. It's the most astonishing story. It's a sort of a combination of how the media can jump on something and turn it into a moral panic, how bad police interviewing and bad therapy and a university which is absolutely terrified for its reputation, and so it therefore just throws people overboard, mm-hmm. and throws money at everybody who comes forward. That's basically what happened in this case.
I see. Well, you were coherent. It's very interesting, and I do want to read that book. Out of all the books that you have written, which one was the most meaningful to you at this point in time?
Well, I would say that all of them were extremely meaningful. Memory Warp is probably the most important book that I have written because it puts a flag on this kind of therapy which has really destroyed so many people's lives. Mm-hmm. They ended up, many of them, separating from their parents. Let me read you something this is from The Courage to Heal, which is the book that set this whole thing going in 1988 in a huge way. This is what some of them said. It shows you what happens to people when they go through this. Breaking through my own denial and trying to fit the new reality into the shattered framework of the old was enough to catapult me into total crisis. I felt my whole foundation had been stolen from me. If this could have happened and I could have forgotten it, then every assumption I had about life and my place in it was thrown up for question. I just lost it completely. I wasn't eating. I wasn't sleeping. I had terrible nightmares about my father. So this is in answer to questions such as, do you feel powerless like a victim? Do you feel different from other people? Do you have trouble feeling motivated? Are you afraid to succeed? Do you feel you have to be perfect? Do you use work or achievements to compensate for inadequate feelings in other parts of your life? Do you have trouble expressing your feelings? Do you feel confused much of the time? Are you prone to depression? Do you use alcohol, drugs, or food in a way that concerns you? It goes on and on like this. And they're saying that if you answer yes to a number of those questions, that means you were sexually abused. And most of us would answer yes to those questions. The other thing that they said in this book, The Courage to Heal, was often the knowledge that you were abused starts with a tiny feeling, an intuition. It's important to trust that inner voice and work from there. Assume that your feelings are valid. So it becomes sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy that people are told this, and they either say, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. If I were sexually abused, I would remember it, and they leave. Or
but
they say, well, I don't remember anything like that. Are you sure? And they say, yes, I've had lots of other clients who've had this happen to them. Well, then I've got to know how will I find out if this is true or not? They say, well, you might dream about it, or we could hypnotize you, or you might have a body memory about it. You might have a bad feeling in part of your body, and that will indicate that something happened to you. And then people become hyper aware and hyper alert about everything, and they begin to examine every aspect of their life, and they will begin to come up with something. So it is extremely alarming that it's having a resurgence now. It's coming back.
That's a
shame. People don't remember what happened 20 years ago.
And I'd like to comment on that just because of my previous professions and working with foster kids and just my family in general. I can't speak completely objectively because I did suffer abuse, but everyone in my family, they're just overachievers. That's just their nature. They came from Sweden. They're here in America. They're going to work really hard, and they're not all sexually abused. It's just how they are. And, in Germany, everything is perfect and clean, and that's just the society. So much of it just has to do with your own family, what you see. And then even foster kids, some kids I get, they're not perfectionistic, and they grow up and they're kind of not interested at all in succeeding. And then, but I do remember before anything happened to me when I was younger, I was just orderly. I would go in my mom's bathroom and organize her stuff because it bugged me, not because I'd been sexually abused at that point. So, I can see so many holes in this theory.
Well, you're absolutely right. And if you were a foster kid and you've grown up in situations that really were abusive, then they can take that kernel and grow it into something that did not happen.
Right.
It's not a totally black and white issue. I did find some cases where people were sexually abused and did forget it and remembered it later, but they were generally one-off things. It wasn't like a whole childhood full of terrible things that you'd forget.
Right.
And they were generally things like fondling or exposure that I don't think were interpreted at the time as being particularly traumatic. They might have been confusing or upsetting, but not something you necessarily remember. The other myth is that we remember everything that ever happens to us, and that's not the case. We remember best of all the wonderful things that have happened to us and the worst things that have happened to us, because we want to seek out those good things and avoid the bad things. But a lot of the stuff in the middle we just don't remember.
Yeah, I know.
So
and
this whole idea.
Right. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. You go ahead.
I was just going to say, we all know that to be true. We have friends and they tell us a story about something that happened and we don't remember it. Or, once in a while, I don't remember the scenario when I was younger, when they're like, oh, remember we did this? And I'm like, no, I don't. Please tell me about it. So I'm just supporting what you're saying.
Probably meant more to them than you, or they may be remembering somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
Quite often these memories came from books or movies that people had seen,
Mm-hmm.
and then they sort of internalized them. And by the way, the same thing is true about so-called multiple personality disorder. That is completely built on this idea that you can repress or dissociate horrible memories, and that it makes you come up with all these different personalities. And those were, in fact, the sort of extreme fringe of what I investigated. And many of them believed that they had, been in satanic cults and eaten babies and delivered babies that were eaten, and just ghastly things for which there was never any evidence because it wasn't true.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, that is in the diagnostic manual for mental disorders. They've now renamed it to call it dissociative identity disorder, but it's the same old thing. And that's become part of, it's a great plot device for movies or books. And so everybody just sort of knows it's true because they've seen it or read it. But it's not. It's produced by bad therapy.
I have written a lot, as Ella knows, about child sex scandals and things like that. So I know that these things exist, and I commend you for having the courage to go against the grain in the Sandusky case, because you're definitely going against the popular consensus there. But and I've always believed that the repressed memory syndrome was obviously ripe for abuse, because there's a bandwagon effect that happens. I think we saw a lot of that in the Me Too movement. When that started, I think pretty much every woman said, and I don't know, I don't want to believe that we're that bad, that men are that bad, that literally every woman, but it's maybe we are that bad, but I think there's a band. So it's if your life is not going well, if you have it's a very convenient crutch to be able to say, well, this happened to me when I was young, so that's why I'm so messed up now. So I can understand that, but I think it's a complex issue. But I'm going back to Sandusky, though. What I'm amazed at is that while legally, technically, he may not have been caught doing anything, still, I can't think of an innocent reason to be in the shower with that was a young boy. Was he like 10 or something like that, or whatever?
Yeah.
So I mean, what did he even
actually? He was 13. But you're right. It's not a normal thing for people to do. It was normal for him to do. He grew up in a recreation center that his parents ran. They lived on the second floor, and they didn't have their own shower, so he would take showers with all the other kids in there. And he basically grew up in this kind of all-American Leave It to Beaver kind of world, where he was sort of a big kid. He liked playing practical jokes. He liked throwing water balloons. And when he believed in helping these second-mile kids to be better scholars, and he would, exhort them with very cheesy, corny letters about how they had to be team players and work hard and study hard, and he would even help pay for their college tuition. But he also believed that to be well-rounded, you had to be a good athlete. And he would exercise with these kids, and then he thought, we have to take a shower. And then in the shower, he was stupid enough to, he even hugged people naked. So I don't think any of us would do this. No. And so he put himself in a position where he was ripe for being accused. And that's why I said you really ought to read the whole book, because I go into all of this in great detail.
Mm-hmm. Okay. To go back to you a little bit, I'm curious what author who was a role model to you? Who kind of influenced you in your choices in life?
Well, I would say people like Joseph Conrad and John McPhee was a big influence on me. And in more modern times, who wrote The Lottery? Shirley
Jackson.
Yeah, Jackson. Yeah.
Great writer.
That was a big influence on me. That sort of thing. And in modern times, people like Malcolm Gladwell, although I took him to task for what he wrote in the New Yorker about the Sandusky piece because he didn't really look into it that carefully, but I admire him anyway.
Well, I'm curious, did you get and again, I have to read that book myself, but the Sandusky book, I'm guessing, did you get blasted a lot critically for that? Because you really were going against the grain there.
Well, people who didn't read the book blasted me, but nobody who's read it has, as far as I know.
Okay.
What happened is that it's been largely blackballed. The sports media ignored it.
Mm-hmm.
The Pennsylvania media ignored it, and I tried very, very hard to, get attention paid to it, and it was incredibly frustrating.
And Paterno, Joe Paterno, I mean, a legendary coach like that was just a sad way for him to go out. I mean, I guess you would consider him a huge victim here as well.
He is a huge victim. The irony of this is that the Paterno family, their whole reaction to it was that Sandusky had fooled them and that he really did do all this stuff.
Yeah.
And that puts them in a... So I tried to get them to read my book too. And, because, yes, of course, I defend Paterno to the hilt. He was a very clean-cut guy. He and Sandusky did not, in fact, like one another. Sandusky was the practical joker, the nice guy who got the best out of his defensive line, not by yelling and screaming at him, but by being a thoughtful, good guy. Paterno did yell and scream at them and belittle people, but later on, after they hated him, they decided that he'd been a good influence in their lives. But Sandusky was a teetotaler. Let me tell you one other ironic thing. Sandusky has a very low testosterone level, a low sperm count too. So he couldn't have children because of that. That's why they adopted all of their children, he and Dottie. So it's kind of ironic that he's been accused of all these things. The other thing is, in the middle of all this, the attorneys and the detectives who were investigating Sandusky were sending horrible racist pornography back and forth to one another, whereas there was no pornography ever found in Sandusky's house or on his computer, because he was a squeaky clean guy. Didn't smoke, didn't drink, exercised all the time, etc.
We just have a couple more minutes, just so you know.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm going to have to leave in a couple of minutes, too.
Okay, so tell us real quickly, any projects on the horizon?
Yeah, I've written a book called The Secret Disciple about Jesus. And it's an alternative version of what happened after he was crucified. So that will be highly controversial also. It's a short book.
It'll be interesting, though, I'm sure.
It'll be interesting. It'll come out in a few months, I believe.
Okay. And then how can people, again, let's just review how people can find your books and information. I know you have a website.
Yeah, my website is markpendergrast.com, and people can actually write to me from the website if they want to. And all my books are listed there. I've written a few children's books, so I've been a busy guy.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And I just want to remind people, if you're listening today, if we definitely survive on what donations you give us. So please, if you can go to freedomslips.com and there's a donate button there, please donate to our station. It's important to keep us going and keep the lights on, and so we can be there for you and share this information, this valuable information. And I just want to say thank you very much for coming on and allowing me to interview you. And before we head out, Donald, can you share your information, where to purchase your books and what's going on with you?
My books are available on Amazon: Hidden History, Survival of the Richest, The Unreals. I have two more coming out this year. Crimes and Cover-Ups in American Politics, 1776 and 1963 will be released in May, and Bullyocracy will be out in the fall. I'm available everywhere. And I'm also hosting my own show, I Protest, now, every Friday, 5 to 7 Eastern Standard Time on Iheart Radio.
Great. And how do people find that? Just have to download the app, or how does that work?
They can go to TFR. It's through the Truth Freedom Radio Network. They can go there and listen live. It goes out live somewhere, I don't know, but then you listen to the archives. It becomes essentially a podcast afterwards. And then they, like you, they can donate there, and we encourage that because it keeps these alternative stations alive, so you don't have to listen to the same old talk radio.
Mm-hmm. With the same stories, covering the same sound bites as we were talking about earlier.
Yep.
Okay. Well, we just...
Donald, what's your last name? I didn't catch the beginning.
Jeffries. Donald Jeffries.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Yeah. You Google me. You won't find as much about me as you, but you'll find pretty much stuff out there.
Great. Okay. Thanks a lot.
It's great.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. We just have another minute or two, Donald. So, tell us about what's going on your show this weekend.
I'm going to have I'm going to have the guest you had, is Maria Espinosa. We'll be talking about immigration, and then we'll have Paul Nathanson, who will be talking about how little boys are being basically denuded, I guess, or whatever. They're having the little boy taken out of them, and it's a kind of a campaign against boys. I'm interested in hearing about that because it's something I've noticed myself as well.
Yeah, that's something that's very interesting. And I had him on, and I didn't, being a woman, I was a little skeptical, but I really enjoyed him, and he's got very great viewpoints, and he's correct. I really believe that his viewpoints are correct. And there's a happy medium. I'm a little saddened to see that little boys can't hold little girls' hands or touch them.
Exactly.
They're trying to teach them that at a very, very young age.
We need boys and girls both. Definitely.
Well, that's true. In a memory warp, I talked about the child praise that has gone on for many years, where if children do something to each other, they're now called molesters. If they play doctor, it's really terrifying.
It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous.
Thank you for joining us, everybody. And again, thank you, Donald, and thank you for coming on. And I look forward to the next show. The next show is Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Look forward to seeing you guys there. Thanks.
Thank you.